Welcome to The Whole View. I'm Stacy Toth of Real Everything, and I'm here each week to dive deeper into how we can find happiness and health inside and out through self-love, body positivity, and discovering new ways to be our best selves. Before we get started, a reminder, this podcast is for general educational purposes and is not intended to diagnose, advise, or treat any physical or mental illness. And while Kate is a registered dietitian, she's not yours. So we always recommend that you see a licensed health professional accordingly. That said, I want to welcome expert dietitian with a master's in human clinical nutrition, Kate Morton, founder of Get Wellness. She shares about her experience navigating hormonal health and autoimmune disease on her podcast, Period Chats, where I was recently a guest, so you can pop over and listen. And after she quit birth control, her personal experience fueled her drive to find solutions, merging her scientific know-how with genuine care. Kate is dedicated to menstrual health. And today we are going to get into it for all of our menstruating friends. Before we do this rapid fire myth busting, Kate, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Maybe a fun fact. You were just on vacation. Tell people where you went.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and I had so much fun having you on my podcast earlier this week. So, yeah, a little bit about me. I'm a dietitian. I'm turning 30 soon. My birthday is in a couple weeks, so I'm planning that and getting excited. I just got back from Sri Lanka, which was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. I was actually gone for almost a month, so that I feel really grateful I got to take some time and work from over there. I live in Austin, Texas. I have a super cute little dog, and that's really it, just living the normal life.
What kind of dog do you have?
I have an Aussie Doodle, and he's almost 9. He's super needy and adorable and perfect.
I have 2 needy dogs myself, and I don't know why that just, like, fills my cup. I need them to need me in some sort of weird dynamic. And all the cat listeners right now are tuning out and rolling their eyes. It's okay, we see you. It's okay, you can like cats too. I would love to start with what you think the biggest misconception is about menstruating. Say that 3 times fast. A quick Google search took me to a bajillion articles about like all the myths about periods. What do you think the biggest one is?
So, I think the biggest myth, and maybe it's more of like a misunderstanding, is that our menstrual cycle is just our period. This was like my whole belief about my period and my cycle until I was like 25. And I didn't understand there's actually 4 phases to the menstrual cycle. You feel different in each phase. There's different hormones going on, different ways to support your body. And it's actually completely normal to not feel the same day to day. And if I would have known that, I started my period really young at like 10. But even if I just would have known that in like high school, I think it would have really shaped my self confidence and my body image and just every belief I had about myself in a different way.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think not getting that until really my early 40s. I don't Yes, of course, I knew that there were fluctuations in the hormone cycle, but being able to understand what each of those means and harness them as a sort of superpower, right? To know when you're going to be most energetic, when you're going to need the most rest, when those kinds of things are, I think, almost like, why is someone gatekeeping this information from young ladies or people who menstruate, right? So, yeah, I love that answer. Something that I think about a lot is, especially as someone going through perimenopause, is who we're referring to when we say people who menstruate. So I just myself use the word ladies, but that's not necessarily the case with who we might say are the people who are menstruating. So before we like fully dive into the show, I do want to also remind everyone and make sure everyone feels inclusive. And for those people who are male assigned at birth and who identify that way and are still listening to the show, kudos to you, because it's good for you to know this information, because I guarantee you that there are people in your life who are affected, and being able to help and support them is a good thing too. But maybe you can walk us through what some of those things are, so that I don't want someone who's currently not menstruating because they're breastfeeding, an experience I had, to not feel like this is for them, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I did a TED Talk been almost 2 years ago now, and the whole theme of the TED Talk was how the period stigma was created based on a lack of education and understanding. And so I think that knowing about menstruation, knowing about our hormone fluctuations, all the way from puberty through menopause is important for every single member of the population because there's someone in your life that you love that menstruates. There and like also just being generally educated about our bodies, even if it doesn't directly apply to you, can make you so understanding in ways you didn't even know. So, for example, my husband, he's like the director of a sales team. Half of his team menstruates. They didn't have period products in the office. He actually went to the person in HR and said, "Hey, could we have free period products in the office because this is like a roadblock for some of my team." So like you can advocate and support and be a part just by knowing. So please don't tune out even if you're not menstruating. Please stay and listen because it's really important for everyone to know and, like, you're gonna get some fun facts, and you're gonna be able to do some myth busting after this episode, and I always love, like, when someone's like, for example, "Oh, you're hormonal on your period." Actually, you're not. And you can be like, "No, actually, people who menstruate are not hormonal on their period. This is the time it's the lowest." So you're gonna sound really smart after this episode.
It's so funny. I am currently going through perimenopause and my periods are super intense, right? Like it's a longer PMS period. And then when it comes, it's like so intense. And
Heavy.
so, yes. And yesterday I was in the car with my husband and I just was like irrationally irritated at life in general. Like there is absolutely no reason for me to be upset at anything. I just was so irritated. And I remember yelling, I was like, I'm so mad at my hormones, whatever hormone I need right now. I just want it. So I love that you said part of the problem is it's actually when we have the least amount of hormones, right? It's not because we have excess hormones or we're hormonal in that moment. And before we move on to the rest of the thing, I do want to also acknowledge that whether someone has gone through menopause, whether they're not currently menstruating because of pregnancy, breastfeeding, or some other cause, there are a lot of autoimmune diseases or chronic health conditions that might prevent someone. I know when I was a competitive athlete, there were a lot of women who struggled to maintain fertility and menstruation. Like that we welcome you and we want to help you learn. And Kate is a great person to connect with about that. So I want to make sure everybody feels welcome. We see you. You're welcome here. um, so something I'm experiencing today that I thought would be good to ask a question on is our immune system affected by our cycle?
This is such a good question because I am a fellow autoimmune
Hmm.
girly, so I, like, have looked into all of this. There is actually really conflicting peer-reviewed research on immunity and menstrual cycles, but the, like, thought process that to me makes the most sense and has the most research behind it is that our immune system actually goes down in the luteal phase, so that's after ovulation, but before your period starts, because our body's whole goal, whether we want it to be or not, is reproduction to further our species. So it really is hoping for that egg to get fertilized. And so it's lowering the immunity to allow that to happen because a lot of times people don't realize that like our immune system attacks things that aren't supposed to be in our body. So the research shows that it does lower your immunity in this phase. A lot of people actually report getting sick like right before their period, more likely to get a cold, flu, virus, like whatever it is. So that's the thought process that is making the most headway. But I'm gonna be real with you guys, we don't have a ton of research on our menstrual cycles. So a lot of it is guessing or going off a few peer-reviewed articles that we have, but that's what we know so far is that immunity is lowered. Our immune system is weakened or takes a break. In our luteal phase, if you have an autoimmune disease, it feels nice because it offsets it a little bit. But yeah, that's what we know so far.
And one of the reasons that we don't have a lot of research is not just on periods specifically, but because women are not included in scientific studies. I actually just recently did a show on that. And it's mind blowing to me. That's where we still are in the modern day and age. So, through trial and error, though, I know you talk a lot about how to improve your cycle based on lifestyle factors and reducing symptoms that way. Can you talk a little bit about the methodology and mindset in that?
Yeah, so I think the first step is obviously education and learning about your cycle. And even like you were mentioning perimenopause earlier, perimenopause, in my opinion, is one of the most underserved communities and life phases because we know about menstruation, we know about pregnancy, we know about menopause and puberty, but perimenopause can actually start around 35, most commonly around 40, and it lasts about 10 years. So it's a long journey,
It's a
so
super
that
fun time. It's so great. You
I
just can't
know.
you'll be so excited.
I have a couple friends in perimenopause now, and it's interesting. My mom went through perimenopause really late at like 50, so she was super confused about what was going on. So it's a very intense period, and it's usually hitting right when we're the busiest in our lives, like peak of careers and like all these other things, raising families. So if you're in perimenopause, while I'm not personally going through it, I hear you and I see you, and I have so many clients that are going through it. So all that to say, step one, I think education so that we can understand and identify where we are on our own. So, understanding, is my cycle regular? Am I ovulating? What's my lifestyle look like? And then from there, I really don't like to get too prescriptive because I'm someone who likes to dive all in on things. So, like, if you told me, like, here's a list of 10 things you need to go buy at the grocery store right now, I would go buy them. So, I try not to do that because I know that's not necessarily the healthiest approach. So, when we're talking about hormone balance, one, understanding and being able to identify where you are. Two, the most underrated tips, and I know you're going to think this is boring, but it's getting enough sleep, reducing our stress, and incorporating some mindfulness practices, staying hydrated, moving our bodies in a way that feels good, and nourishing our bodies. So this is something we talked a lot about when you came on my podcast was it's so easy to undernourish your body if you're just following what's going on social media and following all the trends. But what it comes down to is getting enough protein, getting enough fat, and getting enough fiber in your diet. So that's just like a little, just to set the stage for what we're going to be talking about. That's if you hear nothing else, like really, those are the tangible free tips you can take away today to improve your hormones.
And you talk about something called seed cycling that kind of incorporates a little bit of that. Can you share what that is and why it is?
Yeah, so seed cycling is actually something I always call myself like an accidental entrepreneur. I worked for a small business and I was like, this looks really hard. I never want to do that. And then I got introduced to seed cycling and I was I when I came off birth control, I was one of those people that just like had every textbook thing of like that could go wrong, did go wrong, like acne, cramps, PMS. Like I had to call off of work every single month. And so I was actually going to a dermatologist to go on Accutane for hormonal acne. And he mentioned seed cycling to me, and then a friend had mentioned it too. And I was like, this sounds like BS. I don't know, but it's actually really simple and easy and always eating different seeds at different times of the month. And so what it is from the first day of your period till you ovulate, pumpkin and flax seeds, then ovulation to your next period, sesame and sunflower seeds. And just to like make it really simple, what it does is it supports estrogen and progesterone because they actually need different nutrients to like fully progress through the hormone cycle and to feel balanced and not experience the symptoms I was just talking about. So it's really as simple as eating 2 tablespoons of seeds a day. It's like a natural multivitamin. Seeds are like the placenta of the plant, so they have so much nutrition in them. And we're all so busy. It's like impossible to sit down and be like, okay, did I get enough magnesium? Did I get enough calcium? Did I get enough of this? And so that's where seed cycling comes in, does it a really effective food-based way that also has fiber. And it was a game changer for me. And then I started making it in my kitchen for my friends, and then it just snowballed from there.
So you make a product called Funk It Wellness where people can buy the seeds and eat them, consume them, put them in other foods during different cycles of the month. And listeners, Kate does have a coupon code for you. Yes. If people
Yes,
want to try it.
yes, it is 20% off and it's just whole view. So 20% off and you can do it on anything on our website. If you're in perimenopause, we actually have a perimenopause blend that has more flax and more sesame, so more phytoestrogens to help with dryness, hot flashes, and sleep. And it's all in one bag because I had a friend going through perimenopause when I was developing these products and she was seed cycling, but she was telling me Honestly, I'm already frustrated enough that my cycles are regular at this point. It's just like one more reminder that I'm going through this. And she's
Yeah,
like,
I can see that.
can you please make me something for me? And that's like where the Revitalize blend came from. So if you are in perimenopause, we have that. And then if you're on birth control, we have something called Cycle Bites, which is 100% food-based multivitamin that kind of replenishes a lot of the nutrients that can be lost from hormonal birth control.
Interesting. I it was cool to see that you have some statistics and information on the site to show that 71% of people have less painful cramps, 68% have less severe PMS, 62% improved mood stability. And I think for me, as someone who prioritized so much removing things from my life, which is something we talked about on your show, right? Like I spent so much time obsessing over taking everything out of my life instead of thinking through, like you're saying, what do I need to do to support my body, to love it, to nourish it? I love the idea of instead of focusing so much on reducing and removing and elimination and all the stress that goes along with that, instead, this mindset of what are the nutrients and the activities that I can do to support my body in a loving, caring way, to fuel it, to nourish it, to help it feel good. Like, I think even just from a mental health perspective, that's a huge shift that could also have an impact on how we're feeling. I do want to talk about a little bit more about the nutrients that you mentioned, but before we do that, the question that I specifically asked was like improving symptoms. And I will say one of the things that I've talked about on social media that blew people's mind was one of the activities that I do when I first get my period that's like helps it be less heavy. And especially as I like entered perimenopause and started getting more kind of clot like periods, was I do this thing that I'm going to call a clean sweep in the shower. And you can actually remove a lot of the things in like the first 24, 48 hours when it's very heavy for me that would like come out and you'd have to deal with it with a cup or with a pad or whatever. I actually just physically remove it from the inside of the vaginal walls myself with my hand in a shower. And people are like, what? This is mind blowing. And I talked about it on social media. And I'm like, listen, I don't want to talk about the shame of touching yourself. Like, that's absolutely ridiculous. If I can touch my hair and my elbow, I can touch other parts of my body. And this is giving me quality of life. I want to share this information with you. So that's something that helped me. Also, quitting caffeine was something we talked about on your show, which helped me because it reduced my cortisol, which helped my hormones altogether. Right. So that was huge for me. And then years ago, after my pregnancies, I no longer went back to tampons. I went to a cup. And that was huge for me. It shortened my period by a couple of days. And like going from tampons to basically anything else, I think will help. So I wanted to mention those. And I'm curious if you seem to like make a face when I said clean sweep. Is this something that you've not heard of or you're like, oh, let's get into it?
No, I think this is awesome. Like, one, I love the practice of just like getting more in touch with your body too. Like, I think that's so underrated when it comes to our hormone health too, because we're really taught to like, don't say the word, don't talk about vulva, don't do any of these things, don't touch. And it's like, it is a part of your body. And like, when you're saying that, I'm like, this makes so much sense. Like, I actually have never heard that, but that is so cool and makes so much sense. And I just think mind body connection, there is a lot of research on it, but like just from my own personal experience, you have to be connected to these parts of your body. Like if you're not connected to your uterus, your period, your vulva, vagina, like it's just like the shame just keeps multiplying, even if we don't realize it. So when you said that, I was just like, wow, that's so, I love that. And I was just like imagining what the internet trolls had to say about it because I just know what the comments I get on my videos. So I was just like, oh, I bet the comment section is popping.
I have actually turned off comments from people who don't follow me because I just can't even anymore. And it was
Good for you.
it was like one of the best, mental health things that I ever did for myself. And I recognize that it's not feeding the algorithm of negativity that Instagram loves, but I don't care. It's good for me. And I love, even if it helps like one or two people, I heard from so many people after that were like, oh my gosh, I did that the next time I cycled and it cut my period by 1 to 2 days. I'm like, yes, because you're getting rid of so much of the stuff up front, then your body can more easily cycle itself, get rid of it because it's not all clogged up at, I don't know why I cannot think cervix. It's not like stuck at the cervix. And for me, because there was so much clotting at that area, it's means that it's not leaving as quickly as it could. So
It's amazing. I love all of that. That's so cool.
whatever advice helps people. And so you talked a little bit about protein, fiber, fats, and specific nutrients that support the cycles in general. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit more, like dive into that in terms of specific fruits, vegetables, greens, legumes, what proteins, specifically like omega-3 rich proteins, or where might we see benefits and where to focus them? For me, my body tells me sushi every time right before I'm supposed to get my period. And I'm like, it's the omega-3s. I know it's the omega-3s. But for people whose body maybe is not being so loud with those things, or who might want to focus on foods and nutrients, knowing that it would support it, even if their body isn't like saying, whatever. Where would you have them
Yeah.
start?
So it's so funny. Yes, this like omega-3s and sushi, salmon, tuna, all those things are going to be great all cycle long. Yeah. And I'll focus on things that are good all cycle long because I really like building that good foundation. Leafy greens are one of like, which is like kale, collard greens, spinach, like any of the darker green greens. They are so nutrient dense. They have so many of the nutrients that we need. Plus, they're a really good source of prebiotic fiber, which feeds our good gut bacteria. And then the gut hormone connection is just undeniable. So, a lot of times I'm telling people if you're experiencing a lot of GI symptoms, that's actually the first place to start before we start even talking about like quote unquote hormone balance. So, leafy greens, berries, oranges, like all of those really bright, vibrant fruits are going to be so packed with antioxidants, which is really important for supporting ovulation and helping to reduce inflammation because, like you mentioned, high cortisol leads to high levels of inflammation. That can lead to a lot of different issues, but painful periods is one of the most like direct ones we can point to. So with protein too, it's if you want to do plant-based protein or animal-based protein, it's really up to you. It's just making sure we're getting enough of it. So I really like lean meats. If you have access to anything that's local, like we have a farm that's actually a lot more affordable than the grocery store close to me. It's just like direct from the farmer. That can be great. But then also like quinoa is a great plant-based protein. And you can do lentils. Lentils are my favorite thing. We have them almost every week because they're easy. You can buy them in bulk and they're super cheap. And then from there, you can do so many things with them. So that's where I get a lot of my protein. Eggs are a really great protein. If you have an autoimmune disease, you just might want to check and see if eggs work with you. Some people they do, some people they don't. Another thing, nuts and seeds are also an amazing way to get a lot of nutrients in a small amount of like, just like packs a good punch. And then the biggest thing too is just remembering to eat consistently. That's something I feel like I'm just always reminding my clients is like, okay, one meal a day is not enough. Like we need to be having 3 meals a day. We need like good snacks, just really like wrapping that up. So leafy greens, I love oranges, lemons, berries, apples. And then also another radishes are another amazing thing I love to incorporate in. They're really good for liver health. And then those really good proteins, you can do animal protein or like I mentioned, quinoa, lentil, sorghum's another one that is really good. It's not a grain actually. It is like a legume protein. So those are some of my favorite ones. Sweet potatoes as well. Sweet potatoes are amazing for your luteal phase.
I heard a rumor when I was trying to get pregnant with my second. I really wanted twins. And I had heard or read somewhere that if you eat a lot of sweet potatoes before you get pregnant, then you have a higher chance of twins. I ate so many sweet potatoes trying to have twins and did not have them. I'm
That is so
assuming
funny.
that there's like no basis in that at all. But for some reason, I was like, that doesn't hurt to try.
Sweet potatoes are one of my favorite nutrient dense foods. I always tell people, I'm like, if you like sweet potatoes, like they're so packed with like a ton, like Also, something that I think is good is if you look at fruits and vegetables, the brighter the color, as long as it's like a natural color and not a dye, is the more nutrient dense it is. So the darker the green is, the redder the apple, like these, they have more nutrients in them. That's the phytochemicals are, there's more phytochemicals.
I can see that. I can also see like a banana has an absolute high, like the highest amount of potassium that you can find anywhere, right? So it's like the idea of supposedly brown foods as not being healthy, it's like that doesn't necessarily apply all the time. I know I feel really great when I eat oats if they're like gluten-free oats, and I know that it's the fiber, right? There's so many things that I think we have to just like listen to our own bodies and figure out how we feel with them. My husband cannot do beans. Like he gets so sick and it makes me sad because I hear you talk about lentils and I'm like, when I'm on my own, I'll eat beans anytime I can because I'm like, I feel good with them, but I also try to be respectful because everybody else in the house doesn't do gluten for me. So I'm like, if somebody else doesn't feel well in a certain food, I feel like we have to it's the respectful thing to do to not have it.
Yes.
But
Also, I will fight for oats. I know oats have all this weird controversy around them on the
you will
internet
fight for
right
them.
now, but I will fight for them because I think like and for me, I also I have celiac, so like I have to do the gluten-free
Yeah.
oats, but I think they're such an amazing, affordable source of fiber that is actually still nutrient dense and amazing. So I get so fired up when I see like, oh, oats are not breakfast. I'm like, yes, they are. Oats quite literally can be whatever meal you want them to be. I have oats almost every single morning with like an egg. So sometimes you just gotta not listen to social media because I love oats and I get so mad when I see people being like, oats aren't good for you. I'm like, what do you mean?
Well, I think just like that so many things in life, someone can find something somewhere that says they're not good, you know, because but then you can also find something that says the absolute opposite thing. They're good for you for a different reason. And really, I think what we talked about on your show when we spoke is like we have to let go of some of the dogma and the cultural assumptions around food and nutrients and eating and dieting and blah. Um, I lose my voice as I say that because I think my body's just like, no, we're not going to talk about that. We're done with that. We're moving on. And we're talking about loving and nourishing and adding things to our body instead of anytime I hear any sort of like, don't do this, I'm immediately like just tuning it out because if there really is a problem, it will come up in different sources than some random person on the internet telling me what to do. Um, Recently, I subscribed to FDA's website and they will send you notices for things to be concerned about or food contaminations or different kinds of things like that. I feel so empowered with that information instead of like waiting to see it from some other news source telling me in their biased way. And now I can just like read the article directly. And I got one this morning that was talking about PFAS food and food contamination. And I'm like, I am really glad that I'm getting this from the source and can like interpret it and then share that information without it coming from a biased source first or all these kinds of things. So I would suggest listeners, if you're feeling like you don't know where to turn for this kind of information, going to people who have knowledge and credibility, but also to search out for your own way to be empowered and to find some of this instead of just absorbing what other people tell you to do. Because we joked, Kate, that you're like, just tell me the things to buy and I'll go buy them, or just tell me the things to do and I'll go do them. And I'm like, there's so many people like that. And it's so problematic because there's so many people on the internet. I used to be one of them that would be like, this works for me. So I'm going to tell you to do it without a concept of how very different and bio-individual we all are and how problematic that could be from a mental health perspective or all these different things.
Exactly, and that's why, like, look, I think cycle syncing is, like, super cool. Obviously, I talk about my cycle a lot, but the reason I don't, like, necessarily say, like, only eat these things at this time is I just think we have to have an abundance mindset around food because here's the caveat of that. If you're constantly stressed about, "I'm eating the wrong thing in the wrong phase," that's actually probably a lot worse for you than just eating whatever food you wanted to eat. Because, like you said too, we talked about this when we recorded, and I talk about this all the time with my clients, your body knows. like, if you just take a minute to tune in and ask, like, "What do I need today?" Like, "What do I want?" Most of my clients are already, quote, unquote, "eating with their cycle," just naturally listening to what they're craving.
I have it's taken me years to do that because if we have ACE traumas, which we've talked about before in this show, it can be really difficult because you've detached yourself from your body in order to be safe. And so you have to rebuild that connection of trust with your body. And I think that there are a lot of people in this world who have traumas that they aren't even aware of or that are like so pushed down that it's affecting different things in their life without them realizing it. And so, as much as I want to support like this idea of intuitive eating and your body knows and just listen to it, I also have to be like, there are some people who literally cannot do that. Like, I have a child that I'm adopting who is never going to be able to just listen and trust their body because they have gone through so much trauma that like, their mind and their body have disconnected entirely in so many different ways, and so, for those people that are out there, like, there is information for you to learn, like, okay, these kinds of foods that I can abundantly tell myself and encourage myself to focus on, and at the same time, if what I really want is chocolate peanut butter ice cream the day before I get my period, like, that's okay too, and it's not gonna kill you unless you have a peanut allergy or whatever, so
True, unless you have an allergy.
yes. Okay, so let's talk about those kind of feelings that we have, those energy levels that come with our cycle, the bursts of cravings, the bursts of energy, like all these kinds of things that come in these 4 phases that you mentioned. Can you talk a little bit about them and what we can learn in order to be our best selves during those phases?
Yeah, so there's 4 phases to the menstrual cycle, which if you're like me, I did not know that for a very long time. And so the very first phase or day 1 of your cycle is going to be when you start bleeding and actually need to like quote unquote use a period product. I wear period underwear all the time now, so I'm not really using I haven't I agree with you on the tampons thing. When I stopped using tampons, it was like a game changer. So I do a cup and period underwear. So the first day you have to use something like that is day 1 of your cycle. And this is gonna last anywhere from, like, 1 to 5 to 7 days. This is, like, your inner winter. I like to do it with the seasons because I think it, like, helps identify. This is, like, your cozy time, take it easy, rest. Your body has, like, a little bit of increased inflammation at this time, and, like, you're tired because you're shedding the inside of an entire organ. So, like, your body is really doing a lot those first 2 days, and so cozy, and I also this is a really good time for, like, cooked warm foods. Our digestion can slow down a little bit, and so having those cooked warm foods can help us. I love crock pot meals around this time. If you have an Instapot or a crock pot, it's like a great time to bring that out and just really slow cook your food. Think nutrient dense like stews and just really rich, yummy foods. This is when you basically have no hormones going on. So don't ever let anyone tell you again that you're hormonal on your period because you're not. If they ever say that to you, maybe reevaluate that. But that's like the basic first phase. And then and a lot of times too, cravings like chocolate, that can be magnesium. Also, like iron-rich foods, like a lot of people say they crave red meat. This makes sense. Like you're replenishing your blood supply. So those are some more typical cravings. Also, sweet cravings around our period. Our body's going through a level of stress. And so this is usually it crying out like, I need more food. So if you get like a lot of sweet cravings around your period, it can be a little bit of blood sugar instability. So just incorporating a little bit more protein, but then also honoring those cravings because like we can have ice cream, like you said. Like I always crave like Reese eggs, like the peanut butter cup eggs on my period. And I was looking at it today, I'm like, there's actually a decent amount of protein in this, and it makes sense. So that's your period. And then after you stop bleeding, you enter your follicular phase. Think of this as like spring. So this is you're like, oh wow, I feel like myself again. I've got my energy back. I feel super creative. This is because estrogen's rising. Estrogen really has an awesome impact on the brain where we're feeling if you do creative work, we all have creative work. This is a great time for like brainstorming, making content, writing up proposals, like coming up with ideas because we're feeling really energized in this phase. For this phase, you actually have a really good level of blood sugar stability. And this, a lot of times people tell me, oh, I crave more like fresh foods, like raw veggies or like big, fresh, like Buddha bowls or whatever these things are, it's because your digestion is actually at its peak here. So you can digest those things a lot easier and your body's like a little bit more blood sugar stable. Then ovulation comes. This is like your summer. So you're thinking like hot, especially with like workouts too. This is like hot, sweaty workouts is a great time to do those. And then we really want to focus on cruciferous vegetables in this phase because they help to get rid of excess estrogen and help us move into our luteal phase. And so that's kind of ovulation. I really tell people like if you can just focus on fiber, that's great. And then this is a great time for like public speaking if you actually there's research that you're more magnetic in this phase if you're ovulating. Your voice changes slightly, you have a little bit more of a glow to you. It's that, like, baseline of, like, trying to attract a mate is, like, where it comes from. But it's a great time also to, like, ask for a promotion at this time, try to give your, like, whatever big presentation you have to do, like, if you can time it around ovulation, it works really well. And then you go into your luteal phase, which gets a bad rap because it's the 2 weeks before your period. But here's some like tips. This is like autumn. So think about like wrapping things up. I always think about fall as like we're reflecting, we're wrapping up, we're checking off our to-do list, we're prepping for the holidays. That's definitely like your luteal phase. Progesterone takes over. And actually, progesterone takes more energy to be built inside the body, so you're burning an extra 100 to 300 calories per day in this phase. So I don't like to focus on calories, but I say that to put it in context of you need more food. So if you are more hungry, it is because you actually need to be eating more. So please don't ignore that. Your blood sugar is a little bit more unstable here. So we're talking about upping protein, a little bit more fiber, and a lot more rest. And so this is where I'm like, if you can get your to-do list, like what are the top 5 things you gotta get done today? And check those things off, and then just know you did enough and rest and get a lot of sleep and get good meals, nourish your body, a lot of protein, your period will be so much better. And because that blood sugar instability has a lot to do with the different mood swings we might experience. And it's crazy because all this is happening every single month inside your body without you even doing anything. And so just being aware of these changes, even if you don't want to change anything, just recognizing if you hate your job every single time of the month at the same time, one, maybe that's telling you something, but two, maybe it's your luteal phase and maybe we just need to like work around that. So I just like to remind people that like you feel different at different times. If you think about the 4 seasons, I think it's the easiest way to conceptualize the menstrual cycle.
I love that analogy. It was really clear for me and makes so much sense. And as someone whose favorite season is autumn, I actually prefer the energy cycle of the luteal phase because it feels a little manic to me to be in the phase where I'm like so high energy and I have all these creative ideas and I actually like I have a to-do list and I'm a very like logical linear person. And so when I get into that phase, I'm like, what is happening to me? I'm so all over the place. Like I can't even handle it. And I spent all day doing this project instead of like the list that I wanted to do. And so it makes sense to me that my energy is naturally drawn to this phase where I feel like I get to check things off my list. I get to like go through this logical sequence and then I know, okay, I'm done and I feel good about what I did and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm curious if listeners, I'd love to hear if you resonate with that spring phase. If spring is your favorite season in general, do you like the way that you feel in the season, so to speak, of your cycle that reflects spring? Like, I'm curious if we're drawn to those seasons in the same way that we're drawn to like the feelings that we have based on how our hormones are making us feel in those moments. Do you have
I
a favorite
love that you
season?
Yes, my favorite season is spring, and my follicular phase is my favorite phase, and that's so interesting. And the other thing I was gonna say, if any of your listeners have ADHD,
Mm.
um, ovulation can be really tricky because your brain actually I have ADHD and my brain feels a little bit like a scrambled egg because there's so much stimulation going on. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Having ADHD does have different implications throughout the menstrual cycle. And so if you have like a couple days of the month you feel like your symptoms are a lot worse, it can also correlate back to that.
Makes a lot of sense. And I also think it's really fascinating from the perspective of partners or best friends or, these different kinds of things where we have these people in our life. And my husband and I have been together 22 years, and he's still to this day from my pheromones knows the minute that I become fertile. Like I haven't ovulated yet, but I'm in that cycle where I'm fertile. And like literally 2 days after he can't stop humping my leg, I will ovulate. I will like see the physical symptoms. And so it's fascinating to me to hear how our bodies are literally doing magic, right? Like they're making you more glowy, they're attracting people with their pheromones, they're doing whatever. And I'm like, I love the idea of planning something big and important and powerful in your life when you are literally feeling the most powerful and people are attracted to you. And I think that's where, when I say harnessing our superpowers within our cycle, that's exactly what I mean, right? Knowing when you're going to be the most creative or when people are going to be most willing to be persuaded by you or like these different kinds of things. It feels insane, but it is 100% based in science and our hormones. And we're able to see that pheromones is a real thing with ovulation. And we see it in nature. Why wouldn't it happen with humans?
I completely agree, and I just find it so empowering, and I think that's the thing is for so long, I hated my period, and now I'm just like, I and,
We're
like,
like,
I
oh,
don't
let's
even
be
need it.
friends.
I'm like, "Can this is working, like, this is great," and yeah, I do think the pheromone thing is so interesting because even, like, my friend I was at book club the other day, and I was, like, about to ovulate, and my friend's dog was just, like, obsessed with me, like, right there, like, the whole time, and I was like I literally said to book club, I'm like, "I think it's about to ovulate," and she was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so funny, I bet it is."
Makes sense to me. What do you say to people who have irregular periods then, right? Like, as we are trying to harness this for someone who is going through, like your friend, where she was like, this is just a reminder that it's not regular anymore, right? Like, what can be learned and how can we apply some of this in that way?
Yeah, I think my and I also struggle with amenorrhea and irregular cycles for a very long time, so I can understand just, like, the general frustrated nature of, like, feeling out of control when it comes to your hormones and your cycle. So the biggest thing I found helpful was ovulation tracking. And so actually, like, temperature tracking and, like, charting my ovulation because I could see more patterns, and especially for, like, anyone who has PCOS too, your cycles can be a little bit more irregular, but you still are ovulating sometimes, same with perimenopause. Actually, fun fact about not so fun fact. You need to be very careful because actually you're more fertile in perimenopause as your body is trying to get rid of all your eggs. It's why you have a higher rate of multiples in perimenopause. So just want to throw that out there for anyone that might be helpful to. But that's why I recommend ovulation
I know
tracking.
so many people who have like that 10-year age gap because of that. So good reminder. I think, did you ever see, gosh, what was the Steve Martin movie, Married Bride? I'll look it up. I bet you haven't seen it because you're so young. But there is literally a movie based on the fact that the mom gets pregnant and she thinks that she's in menopause. Yeah.
It's a thing. And so I do like to just remind people of that. But ovulation tracking is hands down the best way to know exactly what's going on with your body. If you want to take a more quote unquote woo approach, there is some there's not evidence, but I've seen it a lot with people. It's one of those things that there's no peer-reviewed evidence behind it, but I've seen it with a ton of people I've worked with. The moon cycle actually has a lot of correlation to our menstrual cycle. And so sometimes we'll have people with seed cycle with the moon cycle. So new moon would act as your period, full moon would act as ovulation. And it's incredible to see how many people's cycles do come into alignment after doing that. It's really cool, and I did that when I was getting when I first started seed cycling because I didn't have a regular period, it was like 56-day cycles. So that's one option, but then the scientific option I would recommend is that ovulation tracking because then you can count out, "Okay, this is where my follicular phase should be. Now I know that I ovulated. Here's where my luteal phase is." A lot of times what happens if you have an irregular cycle, you'll have a really long luteal phase, which can be frustrating, especially in perimenopause too, and so yeah, I would recommend ovulation tracking, or if you want to track with the moon and see if that's helpful for you.
That is the case for me, that my luteal phase is longer. And as I mentioned, I enjoy it at the beginning. And then when it starts to get like that high irritation, because like the estrogen and all the hormones have gone completely down and are sitting there for so long, that's when I start to become not myself. And so the idea of using something with phytoestrogens or something like that, I know I could do bioidenticals or something, but I'm just not at the point of really needing that in terms of where I am in this process. And so I love the idea of harnessing whole food sources as supplements to support that feels like a better fit for where I am in that process right now. And hopefully other people who might be trying to navigate that, it's a nice option for us because it's also like, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to get some extra magnesium. Like that's not a problem. And it's interesting to me, as you said, that my cycle actually aligns with what you said naturally, not because I'm doing anything. And there are a lot of people who cycle with the moon. And I've actually done shows about the pseudoscience of it because it can't fully be tracked. But like, if you ask any teacher, if you ask any nurse, they will 100% tell you that people are driven in a hormonal cycle around the moon cycles. And like, we might not know it for certain in science yet, but we're going to figure it out because it's very clearly that the evidence is showing that we just don't know what the kind of root cause of that scientific connection is at this point. So
I read
go
about from
ahead.
a scientist who said about this, he was like being like, "Ugh, it's BS, whatever." He was like, "The moon cycle affects your body as much as laying down on the ground." I was like, "Okay, well, if I go from standing up to laying down, that actually is like a pretty big effect on my body, so I'm gonna take that as validation."
Also, there's scientific evidence that the vibrational waves of the earth has a strong effect on humans. Like uh, one of the things that we do from a mental health perspective is if someone's having a panic attack or whatever it is, like to physically touch earth, and it has a strong scientifically supported positive effect on our health and wellness. So that also
There
doesn't
we
make
go.
any sense that someone would say that. I'm like, in what way did you just make your point?
You didn't make any point.
Right, exactly. You just reinforced what I'm trying to say here. I would love to talk about what some of the best options for menstrual care are. We talked about underwear, but I want to talk a little more in depth about that because it's more complicated than I think a lot of people realize, and cups, which I think a lot of people are afraid of. So, if we're encouraging people to not use tampons, why do you think it is that you and I benefited from switching from tampons? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and so not like a fibers expert, but I can give you guys just like the breakdown of what I've learned. And so one, tampons, it's so frustrating what's allowed to be in them, which just it's so hard for me when I even just begin to look at what's allowed to be in them. And especially like if we're looking from like first off, tampon tax makes like all menstrual care more expensive. Two, even just like the base level tampon that really doesn't have a lot of regulation around ingredients is still not very affordable. So that's like my whole other rant for another day. But one of the biggest things is in the vaginal canal, there are so many blood vessels. It is one of the most highly concentrated areas, which makes sense, like uterus, like having a lot of like nourishment there. It also absorbs into our bloodstream the quickest. So whatever we're putting in there, and that includes like lubricants, that includes period products, whatever is going in there is rapidly getting reabsorbed into the bloodstream. So that's one reason I think we feel better not using tampons. The second is if you think about how like our biology is designed. So we want everything, like you were saying, scooping out, like if things are getting stuck, like we want everything to be flowing out. A tampon just has it all sit and reabsorb. And I had never thought about that like for so long. And so that's another reason that it extends out your period. It's not like clearing everything as fast. And so those are some reasons for me tampons didn't work. And then if you have menstrual cramps, there's actually some good research showing now that tampons might make them worse. And so actually having a cup, period underwear, I think pads are really underrated. I know that they like weren't cool. Like when I was in school, it was like not the cool girl thing to have a pad, but I am like a pad girl, like free bleeder now. It's like one of my like favorite things. So when we're looking at period products, that's some of the reasons with tampons. So period underwear are one of my favorite things because they're you can wash them, you can use them again and again. They really do a good job absorbing. I love them for sleep. The cup is also my favorite because it is just something that like I've run a couple half marathons with a cup in. Actually, one time I had a tampon come out while I was running a half marathon. I had to pull it out and throw it away. Like, while I was running, it was, like, in my, like, shorts, and so I like the cup for that reason too. And then the reason I really love the cup, though, is when you pour it out, you can look at your menstrual blood, which is very underrated. Our menstrual blood and our periods are like a mini report card. So, like you were saying, having big clots can mean, and which is very common in perimenopause because we have higher estrogen, and then because it's trying to get rid of it all. If you have like a small amount of light pink blood, that can mean we don't have enough progesterone. So there's so many different things we can learn from our period blood, and actually measuring it out is really great because if you're having to change a cup every 2 hours, that's an indicator that our period's heavy and we should go talk to our gynecologist. So that's another reason I love cups. The one thing with cups is make sure you're getting, I try to get the ones that aren't dyed because, again, like I was mentioning, everything gets reabsorbed, but as long as it's medical grade silicone, you should be good to go. And pads, also affordable and underrated. I've like become a pad girl now, and Gen Z is making pads cool again, which I really love.
I love that it's cool again. I didn't know that it was cool again because I haven't worn pads since I was a teenager before I was quote unquote old enough to wear tampons, which is a myth. And we need to just set that aside as a patriarchal concept that needs to die a painful death. But I remember feeling like I was wearing a diaper because whatever pads I had in my body size, it was like I had a
Didn't
wedgie and then
match.
I'd go to pick the wedgie and you could hear the diaper sound, right? It was like such a problem. But now that I'm in this phase of my life, I I'm not comfortable with a cup. I don't know what is happening with my mindset or if it's a physical thing, but I switched to pads about 2 years ago, maybe at this point, because it felt like the right thing for me was to completely leave it empty and to let it just naturally go the way that it was going to go. And with the cup, I also was experiencing a little more cramping. Like, not as much as when I was using a tampon, but it still was irritating in a way that as my body was changing and going through like more kind of harsh cycles sometimes, my body just wanted to like be free to live in its own space. And I found Honey Pot pads, and that brand is like a Black woman owned founded company, and she cares so much about the people that she's making a product for and their health. And I love the kind of mission of it. And so I was like, I'm going to try these pads because I was recommending them to other people. And I was like, I am never going back. And actually, I saw an Instagram reel or TikTok or something from Tabitha Brown, and she made a joke and she was like, ooh, that refreshing tingle when you change your honey pot pad because they use, I think it's like eucalyptus oil or like
Yeah.
something like natural refreshing in them. And I'm like, that's exactly right. Like instead of feeling like, ugh, and gross and all these things, I'm like, oh, I feel fresh and tingly and fun. And so that's what I use is honey pot pads. And then I also use period underwear as like a second layer of protection, so to speak. And I really like the brand Modi Body. I have researched a ton of brands, and I don't know if you know this, but there's PFAS in nearly all period underwear. And even if they say that it's PFAS free, like unless it's tested, I'm not comfortable with it. And a lot of brands actually intentionally use PFAS because if you think about it, they know that it's a waterproof barrier. So they're putting it on the opposite side of where your body is touching the absorbent material so that it's not leaking through on the other side. The problem with that is that the PFAS is still being absorbed in that highly absorbable area that you were talking about. And so when we talk about a risk of toxic exposure, any sort of material in an area where we're going to have higher absorption, whether we're inhaling it into our lungs or we're consuming it in our mouth or we're putting it near genitals that have higher absorption, makes it much riskier, so to speak. So I would just recommend, like, if you are looking at underwear, especially like for me, having to think through what does this look like for a teenager, especially because I have a non-binary teenager who is not wanting to be reminded that they're menstruating. So we need to think through like, what does that look like for them in a safe way that isn't putting like toxins in their body. And so it has been a journey, but that's the brand that I've come to. There are articles online of people who have third party tested, I think Momovation and somebody else. I'll put a link in the show notes too. There's like an EWG article that I looked at when I first was going through and trying to find the reason I use Body Body is because they're size inclusive and not all of the brands that are eco friendly and PFAS free are also size inclusive. So that's the one that I was able to find.
I love Modi Body. I also use Thinx, which I know there's, like, a lawsuit with them on the PFAS, but look, guys, I already bought them and on a budget, so we're gonna keep them. And so I have Thinx ones, but I also have Modi Body ones. I have actually the Modi Body. It's like a boy short boxer
Yep.
underwear, and they're
Yep.
so comfortable
Yep.
to sleep in.
I have 2 of those
Love.
and I wear them at night for sleeping. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, but I'm all about some, like, free bleeding period products, and I'm all about looking at your period blood, getting in touch with your body, like, it's really important because there's so much it can tell you for, like, that's just right there every month.
It's interesting. I wonder how much hearing you say free bleed or like these kinds of things makes it like people uncomfortable. And I'm hoping that it's a little bit different than saying like save it and make art with it. I can't go that far, right? But I can say like this is your body and it's nothing to be ashamed of. So I always like to leave listeners with something positive and actionable to suggest that they can take. And after listening today, to not feel overwhelmed. They just heard you talk about like all the cycle stuff and all these nutrients. And oh, I got to change the tampon that I'm using. Like they're feeling all of these things. What would you suggest someone the one thing that they take away to work on for themselves?
Honestly, the one thing I would say, like, if you hear nothing else, is, like, just start tracking your cycle and noting down how you feel in each phase. Like, I think that's, like, step 1 is just, like, start getting in touch with your body and, like, being curious, and when you're writing down like, I do, like, a one-word, like, little journal entry on my period tracking app, and I try really hard not to have any judgment towards it. Just, like, write down the word, let it go, and then look for some patterns. Because I think that tracking and identifying patterns is the first step in really understanding what our personal bodies need, not just, like, trying to implement all these, like I'm so bad about dropping, like, 1,000 different tools, so, like, that's the first one I would do is, like, just start tracking and, like, entering one word on how you're feeling and see if you can find any patterns and get curious about your body.
I love that. I've recently started using the EV ring, which is like specifically made for women to be able to track their cycles. And I love the data and the knowledge and the information that I get from it. So listeners, we'll put a link in the show notes for you to Kate Morton. You can follow her on Instagram, her website, Funk It Wellness. Don't forget to use code WHOLEVIEW for 20% off. And I will also recommend that you go to patreon.com/the whole view if you want to support the show and get episodes ad free delivered to your inbox. And I want to thank you so much for listening. If you have just another 30 seconds to leave a review, it makes a huge difference in my ability to do this work. And don't forget to follow or subscribe in whatever podcast app you're using. As always, we appreciate your willingness to be open to grow through your own personal changes. No one is perfect, but in listening, learning, and unlearning, we can choose to become better versions of ourselves for ourselves. Thank you so much for being here, Kate. It was wonderful to connect with you. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with our listeners.
Thanks for having me.